كُنْتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ مِّمَّا نَزَّلْنَا عَلَىٰ عَبْدِنَا فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِّثْلِهِ وَادْعُوا شُهَدَاءَكُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. And if you are in doubt as to what we have sent down to our servant, then produce a chapter like it, and call upon your helpers beside Allah, if you are truthful. In this verse of the Holy Quran, Allah Almighty has presented the perfection of the Holy Quran in the perspective of an argument. And this is not the only way that Allah Ta'ala has described that perfection. Elsewhere in the Holy Quran, as we all know, Allah Almighty says that Al-Yawma akmaltu lakum deenakum wa atmamtu alaykum ni'mati, that this day have I perfected, or this day have I perfected your religion for you, and have I completed my favor upon you. Now, both of these claims for us as Muslims and for us as believers, for all intents and purposes, are the same, but they carry a huge difference when we are presenting it as an argument to those who have not accepted the teachings of Islam yet. Now, when we speak of the perfection of the teachings of Islam, as we can see in this verse of the Holy Quran, when Allah Almighty addresses us, Allah Ta'ala describes the teachings of the Quran as being perfect. This is something that all of us as believers understand. But Allah Ta'ala uses a different argument when He presents the same point to the disbelievers. Allah Ta'ala does not say to them primarily that this is a perfect book, but Allah Ta'ala says to them that this is the best book, that if you can bring anything the like thereof, then bring it. So there's a huge difference between these two claims of perfection and of something being the best. The difference is the level of evidence that is needed to refute that claim. Now, when it comes to something being the best, when a person wishes to refute that something is the best, then they have to present an alternative. And not only an alternative, but an alternative that is equal and one that is superior. It places a completely different burden of proof on that individual. But if a person wishes to disprove something as being perfect, then all they have to do is poke a hole in that theory, and that's all it takes. When even one aspect of perfection is proven to be imperfect, or is argued against as being imperfect, or is left ambiguous as being imperfect, then at least in perception it becomes a false teaching, it becomes a claim that is refuted. Now, if we try to argue with people that Islam is the perfect teaching, then that is a mistake that we have made. Because Islam tells us that the teaching of Islam is perfect. That is something to increase our faith as believers. But it makes us vulnerable from a perspective of argumentation. But if we present to others that Islam is the best teaching, then we approach it from a perspective of strength. Now, as an example, we can remove religion from the equation and look at politics as an example. Now, if someone said that I disagree with every political ideology that everyone presents, that Trump is wrong, but Hillary was wrong also. I disagree with Bernie Sanders, he's wrong as well, and then also the more center-right conservative ideals that Jeb Bush was presenting, they're wrong as well. Everybody's wrong, I don't know what the solution is. But these are the flaws in everybody's plans. It's a very easy position to take. Very easily a person can find fault and poke holes in everybody else's ideas on what's best for the country. But the moment you ask that person, well, give us an idea of what we should do, then he finds himself in a completely different situation, a far more difficult situation. Because it's easy to poke holes in someone else's theories and present nothing yourself. It takes no effort whatsoever. And if a person presents their ideology as being perfect, then they open themselves up to exactly those types of critics. The type of people who have nothing to present themselves but say that this is what's wrong with your points. So as soon as a person says as a position of argument that my position is perfect and I can prove it to you, he has put himself in an impossible position of weakness. So this is why the Holy Quran has not taught us to argue the perfection of Islam from that perspective. Islam has taught to teach that it is the best teaching. So this is why if we have a political ideology that we think it is the best, if a person is a supporter of Clinton or Trump or of Sanders or of anyone else, then the argument is that this is the best philosophy, this is the best political ideology and outlook for our country, and it is better than any other alternative. And if a person thinks they have an alternative, then they should present it. And when it is presented, then they should try it and we'll see what flaws there are in it and what faults there are in it. So this is how there's a huge difference between the claim of something being perfect and something being the best. Now, when we bring this back to the arguments on the teachings of Islam, when we talk about different things that people raise objections against, this argument helps us quite a bit. This position to take helps us and improves our argument significantly. For example, people raise the question of suffering, that if God is perfect, and if the world is perfect, then why is it that innocent people suffer? Now, this objection is based on an assumption that they seek to trap us into, which is that everything is perfect. Although everything is perfect from our perspective, yes, from our internal perspective, but that's not the perspective we argue from. The perspective we argue from is that everything is the best, that the laws of nature are the best laws of nature that we have. If you think there's a better law of nature, then present it. If you can create a world without suffering in the innocent, then present an ideology, a hypothetical world where there is a world with no suffering. We can't even remove a single species from the ecosystem without everything falling apart, let alone a person changing the basic laws of nature on the concept of suffering without the entire system of the world completely collapsing. So when a person says that they have a better idea of what the world should be, then they have to make changes. Then they have to offer an alternative. And the moment a person proposes an alternative to perfection, something that is better than the perfect and symbiosis in the laws of nature that exist as they are, then they put themselves in a position of falsehood and weakness. And when they take on that position, then it is very easy to destroy its foundations and to take apart that argument. So here's a huge difference that happens in the way we present the teachings of Islam. When we say that the system of the world is perfect, now we are in an endless and unlimited defensive position of trying to argue against one imperfection or the other. But when we say that the system Allah Ta'ala has created is the absolute best, and there is nothing that can be brought the like thereof, as the Holy Quran has said that if you can bring a teaching the like thereof, then bring it. Then we argue from not a position of weakness, but a position of strength. This again applies to every teaching of Islam. When someone objects to a law of the Sharia, we say that it is the best law. The way that the Holy Quran has approached criminal justice is from the perspective of mercy on the victims by giving priority to deterrence and on justice, and then giving a third priority to the rehabilitation of criminals. If someone thinks that the teachings of Islam are cruel, then they should present an alternative. The alternative that we see that's applied right now in our country is that priority is given to rehabilitation of criminals, and priority is not given to crime being deterred, and justice being served for the victims, for their sense of revenge being accommodated. So the result is that there is a prevalence of crime, something that does not exist under the ideal application of Sharia as happened during the time of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. So when we present the Sharia of Islam as from a position of perfection, then of course we open ourselves up to 1,000 hypothetical objections. But when we present it as being the best teaching, as being far better than a privatized prison system where criminals are institutionalized and brought out far worse, and where they serve as a burden on the taxpayer and society, and we argue that corporal punishment is a far superior way of serving as a deterrent and serving as justice for society, then we offer an argument from a position of strength rather than a position of weakness. So these two verses of the Holy Quran offer us wisdom from that perspective. That does not mean to say that Islam never presents the perfection of the teachings of Islam to those who are outside of Islam. Both of these points are true. It is 100% true that the teachings of Islam are perfect, and also that the teachings of Islam are best. But the wisdom of the presentation of the teachings of Islam is that when a person is exploring and trying to find the truth, then he is trying to find what is best. He is searching all the options, and when he sees that Islam is best, then he comes to the point of acceptance. Although he still has some doubts, but in principle he accepts that this is the best teaching, that this is the truth for me. And then he begins his journey of increasing his faith from there, and eventually reaching that point of understanding through marifat, that Islam is the perfect teaching. And then that aspect of al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum wa atmamtu alaykum niyamati becomes a faith-inspiring revelation for him, an inspiration for him, and a time when a person reaches not the lowest levels of acceptance of faith, but the perfection of faith. So these are the two aspects of the perfection of the teachings of Islam that the Holy Quran has presented, and how they are presented to the believers and separately to the disbelievers. So now, if there's any questions that anyone has on their minds, then we can address them. Alrighty, no questions? So we can do Salatul Isha then if there's no questions.
So there's the perfect book in Surah Al-Baqarah. How is that different than the best book?
So the Holy Quran starts out with Zalikal Kitab, that this is the book. And so that message of perfection, like I mentioned before, that the Holy Quran presents both aspects. It doesn't mean that we can never present the perfection of Islam to opponents. What I just mean to point out is that when it comes to a perspective of debate, there the Holy Quran has repeatedly taken the position that bring a surah like it, bring 10 surahs like it, bring even one teaching the like thereof, or bring a book the like thereof. So that's a perspective of debate. But still, the perfection of the Holy Quran can be presented in general to a person who has not accepted Islam but is a well-meaning person who is searching for the truth. But to present the perfection of the teachings of Islam to a person who is not well-meaning but from a debate perspective, that goes contrary to the objective that the reaching our objectives with wisdom. But the opening verses of the Holy Quran basically say that al-kitab, that this is the book, and one of the meanings of it is the perfect book. It means the complete book. It means that book. This is why we find various translations, because when the word al is used, then it has a meaning of either referring to something specific, not as a generality, but as there is a specific thing that book or this book or something that was referred to earlier, or it refers to something that is a very broad and complete sense of that thing. This is why there are two translations done. One is the complete and perfect book when it is taken in this verse by itself, and then another aspect which is taken is this is that book as a follow-up to Surah Al-Fatiha. That in Surah Al-Fatiha, Allah Almighty had described that Allah Ta'ala bestows His special favors onto those who are the believers, and it had made reference to the people in the past who had incurred the displeasure of Allah Almighty. And so this, in an implication, carries a reference to the previous peoples in their previous books and how they were awaiting for a perfect book to come. And so that's one interpretation that can be taken as well of Zalik al-Kitab. Okay, so we can do Salatul Isha then. I think just a point, I'm not sure what happens, maybe if it's combined on the other days, but the days that we do namaz separate, I was just suggesting that the time of Salatul Isha, the early time of Salatul Isha begins about 40 minutes or so after sunset. So then if we start Maghrib, immediately at sunset, then by the time we finish Dars and do Salatul Isha, it's actually not even going to be time for Salatul Isha yet. So on the days that we do namaz separately, then it's definitely, you should keep in mind that the time of Salatul Isha, according to Fiqh Ahmadiyya, there's an early time where it starts, and then there's a proper time it starts. The proper time Salatul Isha begins is when the whiteness disappears from the horizon, and then it is complete darkness. And the timing varies from season to season, but it's more than an hour. An hour 10, an hour 20, an hour and a half after the sun set. But the early time of Isha, which is when the redness disappears and the white on the horizon starts, that starts about a half an hour or 40 minutes or something like that after the sunset. Okay, we can do Salatul Isha. Salatul Isha.